So to start off this video, I'm going to be trimming down my pieces. They are straight off of my drying rack. They were on there for about a week, and I'm just trimming down the edges so that they could sit flat on my tabletop, and I could kind of gauge and figure out how I want them to fit. Because I flipped them up and upside down multiple times, I couldn't really decide which side I wanted up versus down. So with them flat, I could kind of play around with it a little bit more. You could see that that's roughly where they're going to be sitting on the foot. So I originally was thinking of pre-drilling these because I don't think the base was glued together at this point. I'm happy I didn't because those marks ended up not really being in the spots I needed them to be. So after that, I could then glue these together so they're still in their original pairs. I tacked them with some tape, and since they're all about the exact same shape, I just went through and glued them together, and then I finished it up by clamping them all together and letting them set up overnight. So then this is the next day. You could see I have them kind of in place. So now they're going to have to be trimmed down, and I'm going to have to drill some holes for them to fit into. So they glue together pretty well, but with any sort of glue up, there's always some undulations in the glue up, and I find it's easiest to plane down these sorts of things than to just sand them. It goes quicker, it makes a little bit less of a mess. So to round over these edges, I just have a round over bit in my router table, and I'm just sliding all four sides through. It'll end up turning this into almost a rounded piece versus square, and that is the look I'm going for with this. So I have blue tape on all of my legs that correspond with the numbers on the pieces. And then that is how the three of them are fit into place. Like with the rest of the processes in this video, I would do three, and then I'm going to film the last one. So I started by rounding over the top of these pieces, and also like in the rest of the bits, the two are a little bit different size than the two on the other side because the legs are a little bit taller on that side. Once I had that rounded over, I marked where I wanted it to go. I found center, and then I could drill the hole, which I believe was 5/8 inch. These ended up being about 3/4, so my little tenon I'm going to make on the end is about 5/8 of an inch. So I just marked that, and then to make the process a little bit faster, I kind of used this as a crank on my sander and removed the bulk of the material till it was 5/8 of an inch, and then I could come back with my little chip knife and continue removing the material, and then I could get a nice tenon there. So this once again was a process of making that tenon, fitting it into the mortise hole, and then going back and cleaning it up. So the first time around it was still a little too big, so I removed a little bit more material, and then I could fit it back into place. So this is that fitting in there. Now I left these the way they are now. Before this is all said and done, I will make them more flush with the legs. You'll see that in the video. And then I just tape them all in place. So the last big thing I had to bend for this was going to be the circle that connects all of these, which is what your feet stand on. So I had some baling wire, and I made a circle. I made sure that circle lined up with all of my marks, which are the same distance off of the ground, and then I could kind of use this as a rough template. Now I was planning on bending all of this, but as I was looking around my shop, I had a piece that this is the first piece I bent for the chair back, and I ended up deciding to make it thinner than this. This is about an inch thick, and it was an extremely happy accident that it was the almost perfect dimension to fit around the curve. So I kind of crossed my fingers and I sliced this into 4 equal pieces to see if when they're joined they would come close to completing that circle. This cut on the table saw looks a lot more scary than it was in real life. So I just trimmed these down to about an inch and then lined them up, and with my baling wire template it was kind of the miracle of miracles that it ended up fitting just about perfectly. So I had to clean up the edges of this whole thing in order to get it to fit more like a circle. So I kind of drew some 2 diagonals on a piece of wood, and then I could use those diagonals intersected through a circle to make my marks. Now, because this arc that I bent is not perfectly symmetrical, you could see I had 2 different angles, and I just went through, lined up that angle using the miter gauge on my table saw, and cut all of those angles on the table saw. And then you could see it fits together pretty much perfectly, and once it was all sanded, it would fit together quite nicely. So this is just showing how I trimmed off that back angle so that the pieces would fit. Once I did that, it was just cutting off that little bit because the feet are still at a little bit of a curve, and then you could see all the pieces fit nicely. So I just glued this angle, this circle together using a strap clamp, and then this is cleaning it up with an angle grinder. These are just butt joints now, so they'll have to be reinforced. And then I did the same thing I did with the vertical supports. I have a round over bit in my router, and I'm just rounding over all of the edges so it looks more like a circle. So the tail end of this build is actually right before Christmas, so a lot of this is going kind of quickly, and I didn't get a ton of great footage because I was trying to finish up multiple projects at once. So I filmed most of this on my iPad. Some of it actually was done with my iPhone. So I apologize if some of the video is a little choppy and not as complete as I usually have it. So you can see I'm just continuing to go around there, and that just saves a lot of time with trying to round over the pieces. That's the finished piece. So then in order to attach this, what I decided to do was to just cut some slots on the bottom of it so it would sit right on the piece. So I cut 2 on the edges because they're a little bit higher than the other 2, and then I could go through and mark where the other ones went and trim that as well. This was a very easy cut. You could see it's just a little bit of material removed at all the portions where it will hit the piece, and I glued all that together at once. So this is just showing removing that screw. I would drill a 3/8 inch hole, and then I put a dowel in there, and that reinforced the chair back. So to attach, while I had everything else drying, to attach this scaffolding leveling jack to the bottom of the piece, I still had my diagonal straight edges from the original circle that I made, so I just used those to line up the holes in the scaffolding, and then I had, I believe they were inch lag screws, and I just used a ratchet to attach all of those. This made for a nice sturdy attachment. I didn't have to worry about it coming apart. The other chair I had, it was only really put together with inch screws, so I know this will be more than enough to hold everything in place. So this is the one part I cheated on this chair, and I'm still kind of bummed about it, but I was already way behind schedule with it just because bending all these pieces took a lot longer than I thought. So these are the hip huggers that go on the chair, and I was planning on bending these, but you can buy these on Etsy. I got both of these for like $12. So instead of making an entire form and waiting almost a week and a half for them to dry, I was able to order these. They came in about 3 days, which was kind of a miracle, and I could just attach them right to the chair. So I had to remove a little bit of material because of the angle on my chair back, and then I'm just using drywall screws for now to attach them. I will swap them out later with other screws. So I did my initial round of sanding on both of these pieces. I'm going to sand it to 120. I'll probably film a little bit of that, but I wanted to show you a couple things I've done off camera. So for starters, this is dry. It's very sturdy. I'm happy with how it turned out. But I just kind of want to reinforce my corners and keep them together so they can't fall apart. I had this whole jar of these little clips I don't even remember when I got them, but they happen to fit perfectly around that mark, and also they look cool. And I believe in the original photo, which I don't have on hand, there is a metal piece here anyway. So I'm probably going to attach those once everything's said and done. I still have to swap out these with dowels, but I probably won't do that before I stain just because I don't want to wait for the glue to dry, so I'll swap it out afterwards and then touch up that spot. For the chair top, I ended up switching out those screws. I still might find nicer ones, but these are the button top screws. They just look nicer than drywall screws, and the threads are a little thicker than drywall screws, so it's better for wood applications. If I end up keeping these, I'm going to paint these probably, the heads of them black. So the chair is pretty much done. I still have like 2 little marks from my clamps, which I'll probably just keep in there. Once I stain it, this is getting a dark stain. You won't even be able to notice. But what I did off camera, as you could see in a couple little spots, I filled some hairline cracks. I get really crazy with filling hairline cracks. I do pretty much anything I see on here. You can also see I did the same thing with the bigger gaps in the bottom, and like I said, once this is stained dark, you won't even really be able to see it. The putty I use for that is a mixture of sawdust, and I use the oak sawdust from this project, and wood glue. Now before I mixed it, I added my stain to give it a little bit of a darker color, so that it shows up darker now, but once I stain it, it will hide much better. The wood glue will not take stain at all, so you'll see marks in it if it's not somewhat close. Now this color is probably not going to be an exact match, but it will look much better than if this turned out almost like a white, which is what it would look like with just regular wood glue. So I'll probably film sanding these to 120. Also, before I start sanding, a little tip for people who try to avoid the store as much as possible, like myself. Over time, these pads, the hook and loop, it's almost like a Velcro that connects the sanding pads, will wear down, and this will have to be replaced. They sell a kit where you just glue these new pads in place, and this is like $12, and they give you 2, so it will last for 2. The problem with that is you have to let this sit overnight. They say for 24 hours. So I need to sand this, and my sanding dish, you'll know it needs to be replaced because your sanding dish will just start flying off while you're sanding. What I do in between when I don't have time is if you put a little spray adhesive on both surfaces, it'll stick and buy you a few more days before you have to worry about using the kit. So this was obviously, like I said, down to 120. There was a ton of sanding before that, mainly because I didn't really finish a lot of the pieces before I steam bent them, because I knew I was going to have to sand them afterwards anyway. So getting in all these crevices just took forever, and I didn't film a ton of it. I started off at 80 and worked my way up to 120. There was a lot of glue run out to remove as well. I could take the clamp off of that strap once everything was in place and just smooth out those corners. Once those 4 corners were smoothed out, this actually looks pretty close to a circle. I knew it wasn't going to be a perfect circle, but it was definitely pretty close at the end. So then this is the pre-stain, and most people are not lovers of natural oak, I think because it was such a huge color in the 80s with cabinets. So people usually do not like natural oak, but the pre-stain will show you what natural oak will look like. That is the glue I'm talking about removing. And I just actually really liked the way that this looked. It was going to get a darker stain, but I would have kept the chair this way. And I just put the pre-stain on there so that it helps me spot any glue residue I haven't gotten off before putting the stain on. The screw jack was a little long, and there was a crimp in it. I don't know if this was a safety crimp so that you couldn't lower that piece at all the way, or if it was just a manufacturing defect, but it was about 6 inches up off the bottom, and I just decided to cut it off at that point so that the chair can go all the way down to the seat, so that if you wanted to put it at a normal sized table you could, but also this is going to be used at a table that's a little higher and you could still use it there as well. So now the screw can be completely removed, whereas before with that defect you couldn't screw it past that. So then the stain for this is Minwax, and I'm not, Minwax is not my go-to stain, but I had the color that the customer wanted already in my shop, so I used it, and it's not a huge surface area, so I didn't really worry about blotchiness or anything like that on the oak. So I was just going to go through and put a coat of stain on. And then once I had the base done, I could put the chair together and stain the top as well. You want that pre-stain to set for a good, you can't put the stain on if you've waited more than 2 hours, but I wait until it's pretty dry. You could go through and wipe off some of the excess if you want. Then once the stain's been setting on there for 10 or 15 minutes, you go through and remove all the excess. This is a very important step. If you don't remove the excess stain, it won't dry, and your stain, it will stay tacky. It just makes a mess. So go through and remove all that, and you can see how the chair can lower almost all the way to the bottom now. So I let the stain dry for about 8 hours is what the can says, but you really should wait until it's fully dry because those conditions can be changed by the temperature or the humidity, and then I could start putting my top coat on. I started with the base just because it's easier to do with the pieces apart, but it's easier to do the top with it on the stand. You can see, since it's quarter sawn oak, that the rays in the oak are shining through beautifully in the top coat. So this top coat is actually a spar urethane. It's Hellsman's. It's a Minwax product, and it's formulated for indoor and outdoor use. So it's a little heavier duty than like a normal polyurethane. And I preferred that for this chair just because it will probably see heavier use, and your butt's going to be rubbing on the seat, your back's going to be rubbing on the back, your feet will be rubbing on the bottom. So something a little heavier duty was preferred for this. I'm only going to show putting on the first coat. I'll probably end up putting on at least 2. This product has great coverage, so I might be able to get away with just 2 coats, and I'll lightly sand in between coats just like I would putting a polyurethane on. And you can see those patches I did, they're still visible, but they're much more concealed than if it was a stark white sort of patch if you just had the glue. And these are just some photos, not final photos, but right after I finished painting it. I'll try and get some more photos tomorrow to put at the end of this video before I post this. If not, I do have an Instagram, and sometimes final photos end up on there just because I don't finish stuff on time for these videos. I also am very rarely sad to see projects go. If anything, I'm ecstatic to clear up the shop space and get it out of there. But this piece I'm gonna miss. It took a while to make just with the waiting time, but it wasn't an unenjoyable build.